Let's talk about this draft, because so for people who are just getting into the whole notion of how the draft works, maybe we'll just do a quick recap of what exactly happens here. The worst team in American football last year gets to pick the best player available who's just come out of college, and this is kind of the essence of keeping the NFL competitive.
Right, although they get to pick the first player. They don't necessarily pick the best, and that's why the NFL doesn't always rise to a competitive level. Yeah, there's 7 rounds of the draft in reverse order from last year's standings, apart from the fact that the Super Bowl winner and runner-up are the last 2 teams to pick, regardless of where they finished in the standings during the season. Teams can trade their draft picks. They can trade future draft picks, and the NFL awards picks at the ends of rounds 3 through 7, based on your losing free agents in the off season on a very complicated formula. But basically, if you sign a high-priced free agent and then lose him to someone else, you get a compensatory pick. And some teams are very good at doing that. It's sort of getting short-term benefit from these guys, then getting the compensatory pick and using that in the draft. Primarily among those, the New England Patriots. It's one of the reasons they're able to stay good for so long.
Do you think the draft works just as a concept? I mean, obviously it's so embedded in American sports culture that we kind of just accept that this is how things work. Does it work?
I think it does, basically. If you had unlimited free agency, I don't think it would be as bad a situation as people think, simply because the salary cap would prevent you from overspending and getting all the best players the way you can, say, in the NBA and work your way around the salary cap, or in baseball where you can do it by paying a luxury tax. But at the same time, what you see in college football, of course, is that the very top schools dominate recruiting to the extent where they will take players who never play for them, but who could have reasonable careers at lesser schools. And possibly do pretty well, and you could get a bit of that, of roster stuffing in the NFL, the way you see sort of in Premier League football in England or in a lot of the countries, where the 20th guy on the roster is probably better than the 9th guy on a team that's mid-table in the Premier League, but you need him for European duty, and you want to keep him away from other teams if you can.
Yeah, and I suppose the most recent working example of a team using the draft to get good over a couple of years is the Cleveland Browns, who've gone from being completely irrelevant and a basket case to really quite good and very, I don't know if they're going to be attractive to watch, but we hope they will be next year.
It's a really good point, and it was interesting in Cleveland because you had one management group that came in and basically started unloading players, trading them for draft picks, trying to get flexibility with their salary cap. And they did so badly that after 3 years they were fired. The GM was fired. They brought in a new GM, John Dorsey, who's a very good judge of professional talent. And so they were able to use that draft capital they had built up to both draft and trade picks for players and build that team. Plus, they got lucky, I think, in the sense that after half a season last year, they discovered they actually had a good coach on their in their staff who could work with Baker Mayfield and Nick Chubb, their 2 rookies in the backfield, and get the best out of them, which their current coaches hadn't been able to do.
Yeah, Mike, anybody who watches American football knows the value of having a good quarterback, and that's the point about the Browns, is that they also found a good quarterback in Baker Mayfield last year. This year in the draft, we're not quite sure if there is a quarterback who is good enough to be a starting level quarterback for a number of years. Certainly, all the talk at the moment is that Kyler Murray is going to go number 1. He's a short guy, and so there's a debate about whether or not he's going to be tall enough to have a full-time professional career as a quarterback, but he's an outstanding athlete who was also drafted as a baseballer by the Oakland Athletics, who obviously, famously invented Moneyball, so they know what they're doing when it comes to this kind of athletic talent. But is he good enough to actually play in the NFL?
It's a fascinating situation. I think he's good enough to play for sure. Whether he's good enough to be the number 1 pick overall is another question. And of course, it's a very specific conundrum because Arizona used their top pick last year to take Josh Rosen, a quarterback from UCLA. And if you're taking a quarterback with your first pick very high in the draft 2 years in a row, you've got problems. Now, admittedly, they did a terrible job with Rosen in the sense that they didn't build anything around him. No line, not bad, but mediocre receiving core. And David Johnson came back from injury, and they decided they weren't going to use him like David Johnson, but as if he were James Devlin or a fullback or something like that. So Rosen didn't really get a great chance to show what he could do. Last year, when Baker Mayfield came out, there was no consensus that he was the number one guy overall. You had 4 quarterbacks that people went back and forth on. And so far, Sam Darnold looks like he was, he could have justified a number one pick because he did relatively well for the Jets last year. Rosen remains to be seen. And you have Josh Allen in Buffalo, who's a very unusual set of talents in an opposite way to Murray because he's very big. But Murray played at Oklahoma. He took Mayfield's place. Only 1 year of tape on him. So we don't have a great idea of what he can do. He's literally only 5/8 of an inch shorter than Russell Wilson, but he's a different kind of player. And Wilson, very interestingly, also played pro baseball in the minor leagues while he was going to college at North Carolina State. But the question about Murray with all small quarterbacks is, A, will they be able to see the passing lanes in front of them in the NFL where things are more compacted than in college in the line? And will he be able to get his passes off over the better linemen? They're all good. They're all big. They all get their hands up in the air. He's very mobile. He can make room for himself, which we saw Mayfield do last year, which we see Russell Wilson do when the pocket breaks down. His first move is sort of to spin out and then look for something. Whether he's got that presence and whether he's got the accuracy to be able to do that, I think is a really good question. And then you get down to the point with what are the Arizona Cardinals doing? Now, they fired Steve Wilkes after 1 year. They hired Cliff Kingsbury, who has no NFL track record to speak of. But as a college coach, he coached Baker Mayfield, and Mayfield transferred to Oklahoma. He coached Davis Webb. Davis Webb transferred. He coached Pat Mahomes. He's coached guys in that kind of wide open system. And the question is whether that kind of play will translate into the NFL, because the NFL is moving that way offensively. So quarterbacks like Murray have a good chance. But Arizona needs so much help that you almost think that they're playing poker and hesitating on going all in till the last minute. They could trade Rosen. They could draft Murray and trade him. They could trade that first pick to someone who wants Murray. And John Gruden has been making kind of drooling noises in Oakland about Murray. And Oakland have 3 picks in the first round. The Giants, everybody except the Giants, says the Giants need a new quarterback. And we don't. They've got 2 picks in the first round and another one high in the second. We don't know what they intend to do. But originally Dwayne Haskins, who originally was the best quarterback in the class and now is probably down to number 3, or Donald Jones from Duke, who originally was not even in the first round and now is being talked about the second guy going possibly. They might be there when New York come around at 16, but do they want to take that chance? They may want to move up to take their guy if their guy's not Miller. Oakland may want to move up. Washington need a quarterback long term. Miller might well fit what they do. It's fascinating because you just have a team with so many needs that trading would be the obvious answer to some of their problems. They'd be able to get much more talent.
Yeah, this last year's draft was definitely quarterback heavy. Lamar Jackson was obviously also in that, so there was 5 who end up going roughly in the first round. This year, there might be 4 who go in the first round, but no one actually believes that there's 4 first round talents. There's a question mark about the guy who goes number 1. What this draft is full of is pass rushers and defensive linemen and not much else. It's like, in terms of talent, it's one of the least exciting drafts, certainly over the last half decade, maybe all the way back to the Jadeveon Clowney draft. and yet it's been one of the most hyped drafts that I can remember.
Yeah, if I were drafting for every team, 7 of the top 10 guys who went would be defensive linemen or edge rushers. And I think that the interior, the defensive lineman crop is probably better than the edge rushing crop because the transition to the NFL is going to be easier for these guys. I think Quinnen Williams from Alabama is probably the best overall prospect, although Simmons from Mississippi State is probably as good as he is, maybe even better. But he tore an ACL at the end of the season, and he has a history with spousal abuse, which may make, that was a couple of years ago, but it may make his draft status drop even lower.
So he's going to the Chiefs, basically.
Yeah, it's possible. One of the things in this draft is that I'd say sort of like the sure thing kind of guys is about 10 deep. You have the odd player at other positions. Devin White, really good linebacker prospect. T.J. Hawkinson, the tight end from Iowa, the better of the two tight ends, is a really good prospect. But tight end is not necessarily a top need position for most teams. And then you've got a lot of guys who are all in the same group. And so maybe from about 10, say 15, all the way down to 50, say. If you're smart, if you get the guy who fits your system or you can coach into your system, you could get pretty good value in the second round, which screams, for example, New England trading out of the first round rather than going to try to grab a tight end to replace Rob Gronkowski, which there isn't one who can do, trade down and get more players or more draft capital for the next year. Because I think a lot of teams try to do what they do in terms of accumulating picks, trading down, getting value, but very few of them do it for the long term. And everybody says, oh, New England dynasty, blah, blah, blah. They have Tom Brady. That's helped make it easy. But the other thing that they've done is they've always been worried about next year's draft when they do this year's draft. And the reason they can do that is that Belichick is always convinced that he can get a guy of limited talent, a free agent that no one else is particularly interested in, a guy low in the draft, and he can both coach him in their system and adjust their system to his lack of top flight skills. And if more teams sort of realize that would it would make the draft a whole different business. And the odd part is you've now got, say, 5 other teams that are stocked with New England people in the front office or the coaching staff who all understand the way Belichick tries to work, and he'll probably try to do much the same thing.
I wonder though if somehow they haven't actually absorbed the lessons of that. They've sat there year after year watching Belichick do stuff and not actually paid attention to it, because so many of them seem to flop wherever they go.
Yeah, and I think part of it is a big picture thing. I think part of it is that Bill and there's a guy called Ernie Adams in their front office who's he's been with Bill since high school, basically, and I think they see the game the same way, and they do a lot of that advanced planning the same way. And the other thing, of course, is that there's an awful lot of pressure on you to win now to keep your job. Bill doesn't have to worry about his job, so he can continue to plan for the future. Although at his age, you wonder how much more future he needs to plan for. But most teams, when they get in the position to be good, will always succumb to the urge to take the one player they think will put them over the hump, at one position, and will often overpay for that. You don't really want to fall in love with players, especially like in this draft, the shiny hood ornaments that are like wide receivers. DK Metcalf is built like a defensive end. He runs like a defensive back. He could go into UFC or bodybuilding or whatever, and everyone fell in love with him at the combine. But when you watch some of these college receivers, the transition to the pro game is not going to be easy for them. And a lot of NFL teams will draft them and then expect them to fit right in. And they wind up repeating and extenuating their bad habits from college, where they only run 2 or 3 routes effectively, where they can't catch in traffic, where they can't block downfield, all the little things that they require receivers to do. So if you look at this receiving group, it's deep, but you really are going to have to be selective with the guy you take. There are a lot of potentially really good receivers. There's a lot of guys who are really good at what they do, but it's not necessarily what every team wants them to do.
Yeah.
I just think for that reason, it could be a boring draft, but it's a fascinating one, much like the Super Bowl.
Yeah. Yeah, it's needle in a haystack when it comes to finding a receiver. There's one last question I want to ask you about, and this is Nick Bosa, who is the 21-year-old brother of Joey Bosa. Joey Bosa, obviously a superstar edge rusher for San Diego, now LA for the Chargers. His little brother apparently is a chip off the old block, both his brother and his dad, and one of Trump's biggest and most vocal supporters on social media, until recently when he scrubbed his entire social media on the basis that, well, I might be going to San Francisco and they won't like me there if I do that. Does this have any impact on whether or not San Francisco pick him, do you think?
I don't think it has any impact at all. In fact, by saying that, he probably made himself more likely to be picked by San Francisco. And basically everybody has him going number 2 to San Francisco. And as I said, there's a lot of really good edge rushers in this draft, but a lot of them are kind of used to that college game where you basically can beat one not so good tackle with speed. And you know, when you get to the NFL, it becomes a lot harder because you're not going to get those chances so often. I'm not sure that Nick Bosa is as good as Joey Bosa. It took Joey Bosa a little bit of time to adjust, but he's really good. Nick Bosa is going to be good. And you know, if you stick him in that San Francisco line, he's got a real chance to excel. You know, there is one guy who's going to go early in the draft from Florida, safety, Chauncey Gardiner Johnson, who I think with a name like Chauncey Gardiner Johnson is probably a Leinster supporter.
Wearing his moccasins and his fake Munster shirt. Mike, enjoy the draft. Thanks a million.
Oh, I will. I'll probably be up all night watching it, you know.
Great to have you back with us. It's Mike Carlson there giving us his thoughts, and you should follow his Twitter feed for your instantaneous reaction to the draft as it happens. I think it's kicking off around about 1 o'clock this morning, Irish time, and we'll obviously be talking about it again over the course of the weekend and tweeting about it, no doubt.